Chaos!
Questions. And who are they? First guesses to the party. Another avalanche cell. Our holy are now friends from the old guard. It's always their way or the highway. Lately, they've been a real...
What's up, my archfiends of chaos? This is your Kid Roast Chaos with another Final Fantasy VII topic of discussion. I'm sorry, I ain't right now. I'm in the middle of some skincare routine. That's why I'm not showing my face. So you're gonna have to deal with just some regular gameplay until stuff dries. But besides the point, let's get to why I think that Before Crisis is a very integral and integral part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I'm going to get into this discussion right now. There's a lot of reasons. There's actually things connected to Before Crisis that we just figured out. Like when Barrett says he's not part of Avalanche or Wutai. I mean, the Avalanche branch sits in Wutai. That was significant. I mean, and fan theory wise, would probably be considered the fact that Barrett knows about all the atrocities that Fujito from Before Crisis, before Crisis, stuff that's been going on, such as the experiments with Avalanche Black and all the atrocities that Fujito has done for his entire planet becoming one with Zirconiad and wiping out the world, and so Barrett wanted to be a little different. Though, to be real honest, I don't know how you're even a little bit different if you blew up a reactor, which killed a lot of people. I mean, but this is not a video judging Barrett's cell of Avalanche. But this will Before Crisis also goes in the backstories of all the cells of Avalanche. It's not like a smaller organization like it was in the original 7 now. Since we already established that Final Fantasy VII Remake is not Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's the 5th game in the compilation. I've already said that in the Dirge of Service video. It's been stated by Nomura. I don't need to go into detail since now we got the compilation in this. And then you see a different cell of Avalanche in the remake when you go through getting the bombs for Jussie, and he saves they save Wedge. But it's also the fact that what's interesting is if you have the Yuffie DLC, Scarlet mentions a mole in our midst, an information broker, and the reason why Before Crisis is very integral to the remake, which I'm going to get to that a little later on, and it'll explain the backstory of everything that's going on with Avalanche. Even though this game is played by the viewpoint of the Turks, here's the thing. It's in the continuity of Crisis Core. It's in between Crisis Core and 7. It's actually in the Crisis Core storyline. Except you play the viewpoints of the Turks in this. But there is one thing that's significant is when Zack lost one of his war buddies by Avalanche Black's hands. Which is also why Barrett wanted to separate himself from it. Also, Avalanche AQ wanted to separate not only themselves from Barrett, but from that kind of Avalanche. And be like a much better Avalanche, which I don't know if a group of equal terrorists could even be better, but like I said, this is not a video about me judging the actions. Final Fantasy is one of those game series that has a moral gray on what it is. It's like with Dark Souls. There's no definitive good guy or bad guy scenario. It's all up to viewpoints and stuff like that. But anything against Shinra is actually not bad at all. But that's just anything against Shinra is good in my eyes. But I wanted to highlight why Before Crisis is very important to the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Plus, the leader of Avalanche, the elf, was actually the daughter of the leader of the Turks at the time, Veld, before Sung took over the Turks. Now, I want to get to the mole, the information broker for Avalanche. And the only thing I can think of is that it would have to be someone from Shinra's own hand. Now, get ready for spoilers for anyone who does not know the story of Before Crisis. But I'm going to get ready to talk about the information broker and the person playing two sides. The president's son, Rufus Shinra. Rufus had a plan that were to get his father killed by Avalanche by playing everything out, except for somehow President Shinra kind of knew of Rufus's treachery. If you didn't know, Rufus really hates his father. In fact, it explains why he didn't feel sorry in the original or this game when Sephiroth supposedly killed his father, because that wasn't Sephiroth, that's Genova posing as Sephiroth, but even in the remake. But that explains why Rufus was very dismissive, because he's playing both sides. The true leader of Avalanche is Rufus Shinra, which will explain why in the WRO, how they got their funds to fund the organization of WRO against Deep Ground and Dirge of Cerberus. Rufus has been playing both sides all along. You know, he's actually the true leader of Avalanche, but you had to play Before Crisis to figure that out. Which, again, I hope they include that Before Crisis in the Crisis Core Reunion. Like, if you pre-order, you get a DLC. You get a DLC copy of, you know, of Before Crisis. Even if it's just the mobile game reported, I'd be happy just have it. It might be a free game because it was based off a mobile game, so it's just, you know, move your character around and click point type of stuff. You know, I think it'd probably be a good free game, like they did with Final Fantasy 15's King's Tale, which you play as young Regis in a Double Dragon-ish style. I think it'd be possible for Before Crisis in the Crisis Core Reunion as a free DLC if you pre-order Crisis Core Reunion, and it should be, in my opinion, because then you get the full story of Final Fantasy VII. You get the Avalanche side and the Turk side that was not discovered in the original and in the other compilation games. But it's the fact that Before Crisis is, even though they changed a lot of it, they cut the compilation completely out in some ways and changed it around. Like what happened to Sector 6 and the Final Fantasy VII Remake is just an accidentally disaster. There was no Zirconia in the remake. But that's what they want you to think. They just don't want to reveal the details of everything that happened because then that would spoil it. And anything that happened in Crisis Core's timeline, that would even include Before Crisis, would have to be canon. The only thing that we know is not canon is Avid Children and Dirge of Cerberus. But if they're going to make Crisis Core Reunion, then that's all assure that that game is canon. So, what does that tell you? If that's canon, anything in the Crisis Core storyline, even from the Turks' point of view, such as Before Crisis, would have to be canon. I would think it's possible because it's in the same timeline of that. If it's not canon, why go all the way and spend so much money to make a remake of Crisis Core? And it ain't just only to get to know who Zack is. There's a reason why the Moore is doing this. That means Before Crisis and everything in it is completely canon. Even references Barrett talking about he's not Wu Tai's puppet, referencing Avalanche Black, Fuhito's Avalanche. Okay, Fuhito's Avalanche. And then the fact that there's other cells of Avalanche, which is not something from the original game. What does that tell you? What does that tell you, except cementing the fact, the importance of Before Crisis? Not only that, but Before Crisis is the one game that connected the entire Final Fantasy VII compilation. And matter of fact, Dirge Cerberus used Azul from Before Crisis as one of the Spiets. If you wanted the first appearance of Azul or Cerulean, you'd have to play Before Crisis, which was only on Japanese mobile phones. So, if that game connects the compilation and the original, all the characters from Before Crisis that were only compilation characters made a return in the future compilation titles. Think about it. It's very possible that we might see at least elements. Or maybe Fujito might come back, or references to Fujito, Elf, and Shears from Before Crisis. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying that it's a possibility. Because if they're making... Why would they go out of their way to put money and use the remake's assets to create a compilation title? The prequel, Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core Reunion, since it continues Reunion. Why would they go out their way for that if they didn't want the compilation to be canon all the way? Now, we just know Advent Children and Dirge Cerberus is cut out of the continuity. That means the Zirconian incident did destroy Sector 6. Just like Don Corneo said it did. This explains the other Avalanche cells, why Avalanche HQ doesn't fuck with Barrett no more, why Barrett says he's not part of Avalanche or Wutai, Black Avalanche, which is Wutai Avalanche. There's a reason for all that stuff. Also, the fact that Scarlet is mentioned a mole in the mist. In the midst, which is Rufus Shinra. Like I said, Rufus really hates his father. I don't even think it's about taking over Shinra. It's really the fact that Rufus always hated his father, so Rufus was the undercover leader of Avalanche all along. All the cells were because of Rufus's money in secret. Which you wouldn't get that if you play, even if you play the remake, you wouldn't get those references. Even if you play the original, you wouldn't get that. You'd have to play Before Crisis. So why I think Before Crisis is integral to the Final Fantasy VII remake. This is exactly why I think it's integral. Just because of the fact that it makes sense. It makes sense that this would be integral because all the stuff points back to Before Crisis. Everything, the dialogue, if you pay attention, you wouldn't know this stuff because there was no definitive story of Avalanche, even though this is from the viewpoints of the Turks. The beginning of Avalanche started in Before Crisis, which Before Crisis is in the same timeline as Crisis Core, and hence why it is completely related to Before Crisis, and that's why Before Crisis should be considered canon and integral to Final Fantasy VII Remake's lore. And may the crystal be with you.